Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Seibert, Managing Editor with GovCIO Media and Research. You all can come on up. During this session, we'll dive into how your agencies and organizations can build resilient and sustainable infrastructures as you continue to scale AI. So with me today, we have Jonathan Album, the Federal CTO at ServiceNow, Jacob Glassman, the Senior Technical Advisor for the Assistant of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Susan Gregorek, the Associate Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy at NIH, and Kevin Walsh, Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at GAO. So thank you all for joining me today. You all bring a unique perspective to the table, whether it's managing data, building different training programs as we talk about what it means to scale AI and build an infrastructure for that. So throughout the conversation, we'll dive into some of those different technologies and strategies that get us to the next stage. So Kevin, I'd like to start with you. At the Government Accountability Office, you all are known as the congressional watchdog. So to set up the conversation and give a bit more context, where has AI come in the past 10 years in government?
Sure, and hello, and thank you for having me. I think actually Zach did a great job earlier flagging a few things that I'm going to talk about now. During that discussion, he mentioned agencies' use cases and the use case inventories that agencies are required to publicly put out there. Things, as Zach also noted, are a little bit in flux right now, but even though some of those executive orders have been rescinded, that requirement for AI use cases is still out there and present. So that's great, and you don't have to take my word for it, is what that comes down to. You can go out and see what the agencies are doing yourselves. A few little caveats, but GAO's most recent look at that work and those inventories was, and pardon the slew of numbers, GAO-24-105980. Our report numbers suck for remembering. But in that work, which came out late 2023, we looked at agencies' use cases of AI and what it was saying. And the bottom line was there were about 1,200 use cases at that time. Now, those inventories continue to be updated and to grow, and there's even some further refinements. I think now you don't include things on the inventory until they're actually funded, which is a change from how it used to be. You used to be able to put pie in the sky kind of stuff. But at that time, of that 1,200, about a quarter were already in production. So that's 200 plus in production uses of AI in the government 2 years ago. I expect that we've come further since then. And this is not just, little chatbots. This is DHS using AI to monitor cameras at the border. NOAA using AI to count the number of seabirds in pictures taken by drones. And can you imagine the poor person who used to have to do that without AI? 7,561, 7,500. Oh no. So I think AI has a lot of promise and potential, and I'm glad that we're working towards realizing it. And it's come a long way in the past 10 years, although, depending on how you define AI, for including AI as machine learning, then the government has been using AI for a long time. All of our weather forecasts that our farmers depend on are done using machine learning and AI. So in some regards, AI is new, but in some regards, it's been around for a long time.
Right, that makes sense. And Jonathan, I saw you nodding your head. I know before ServiceNow you had a long career in government. So what have you seen?
Well, I think building on what Kevin noted, and I know we want to talk a little bit about data, right? So, all right, testing 1, 2, 3. If there was an AI that could turn on a microphone only, or unmute me on Zoom, that would be amazing, right? So, just building on what Kevin noted and, talking a little bit about AI being in place a long time when you think about machine learning, the core of all of that is data. And data sits at the heart of all of these conversations. So how we manage our data, how we understand what the data means, how it flows through the organization, because that's a representation of the work that our organizations do. During my career in government and before that building systems, and I was a CIO for about 11 plus years in different agencies, including at the Department of Agriculture. I struggled sometimes having conversations, not with people in IT, but with people that ran programs and effectively, in my opinion, owned the data. They didn't necessarily understand all of the implications of putting bad data in a system, or they didn't understand the implications of how that data was protected, where it was stored, how they traded it around. And, today, as we are training models readily across agencies and industry and all over. We're training them on data sets that we have, but we don't necessarily understand, the lineage of that data and the provenance of it. So without that ethos around data management, we end up in a situation where we train AIs on data that's, less than pure, and we don't necessarily get the results, or we can't necessarily trust the results that we're looking at. And one of the things that I've seen since I left government and I joined ServiceNow, we're focused on ServiceNow as an AI platform, is, we talk about, it's not just AI, but it's AI plus data, and then plus the workflows, the work that we're trying to accomplish using, using AI, using the data, the things that we have it in place for. So when we employ agents, like Zach was talking about earlier, and those agents can serve a customer, internal or external, the expectation is that service, ideally is the same kind of service you'd get if a human was doing it. And agents can talk to agents, and they can complete a process, and it's the same if people did it. Well, if we don't have strong data at the core of our systems, if we don't understand it, if we don't use the right models, if we don't have that sort of ethos around data management, we're never going to get the results that we expected, and people will be disappointed, and someone will say AI is just another, passing fad like all these others. Now, I don't think it is. I think that we have so much to gain from it. But there's risk around how we begin to use it in these early days, and and the kinds of results that we expect, and are we, feeding it the right way?
And quick follow-up, what are some of the ways you're breaking down those barriers to data management or overcoming some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think it begins first with having conversations. Just as an example, when I was at USDA, I would ask an agency administrator, what's their most important data? They couldn't answer the question. Or they might be able to answer the question. They might say it was data about farmers. I'd say, okay, well, what system is it in? Maybe they would know that. I'd say, well, where's the data stored? Probably they didn't know that. How do we back it up? Definitely didn't know that. Where are all the copies? They didn't know that, right? So, but having those conversations began a process of awareness, and that's several years ago at this point. And as those conversations continue, and they become even more important based on the data management requirements that we need to have to train models in the best ways possible. We push data out of, it's just a CIO thing or just belongs to the chief data officer, to it's a requirement for everybody in an agency that interacts with the program and interacts with systems to treat this data as truly the fuel that powers the agency and its ability to serve customers and employees inside the agency.
Right, that makes sense. And Susan, I have the same question for you from the Office of Data Science Strategy. What's your perspective on overcoming some of those data challenges from the federal lens?
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel. And just to resonate for a moment on the AI use cases, we supply over 100 use cases for the GAO. We use AI operationally in everything from clustering and finding and assigning reviewers and looking at conflicts of interest for grants, to automating our cold water chiller for the clinical center for large-scale imaging. So it's quite a wonderful opportunity here at NIH to utilize AI, and we're just starting on some of the more advanced AI capabilities at NIH. But in the world of research, we fund almost $300 million to medical schools, to universities, to small colleges, and to individual PIs, of course, to work on novel and cutting-edge AI capabilities, to develop tools that integrate AI, and to really look at how we can implement AI in the clinical centers. So for us, AI is, like my colleague said, it's a long-standing program, but it's ramped up considerably since 2019 as we've seen more investments in AI and more technologies develop. And like was said, AI and data really go well together. If data is the oil, AI is the refinery. It's using the data, but you can only have the algorithms and the training sets as good as the underlying data. And so for us, we spend an enormous amount of energy and thought into how do you create AI-ready data. It's still a concept for us. Of course, the old discussions that we had about data sheets and model cards are still relevant. We do want to know the full provenance and lineage of the data. We also want to know under what circumstances the data was collected. Is there any bias in the data? Having that really deep understanding of the metadata and the data sheets will help us in not only training the algorithms, but conveying to our research community how those algorithms are trained. We'd love to make those training data sets available as well as the parameters of the algorithms. That really does help us forward reproducibility in AI, transparency in AI. These are concepts that we're really championing. And certainly you see that now in our new NIH director and the concepts of reproducibility and the importance of this in science. So anything we can do to really have that transparency in the data and in the training is something that we'll forward going forward.
Right, and Jake, I know that at the Navy you support acquisition, so what are some of the ways that, or benefits and challenges to leveraging AI for defense acquisition?
Yeah, so in the Navy or DoD in general, we have a lot of very unique requirements. We also have, you're going to hear, I'm not even going to repeat everything in terms of where our data is. It's very disparate. It's all over the place. You're talking about decades and decades and decades of acquisition done, all these different places, even in different departments of the Navy, different agencies all handle it differently. Creates a lot of problems. But some of the barriers really, so one is definitely the data. Two is the classification levels. So we have very unique requirements in terms of not just secret or top secret type of material, but also controlled unclassified information. IP is very prevalent within our databases. So how do you untangle that web is an incredible barrier. But in terms of the benefits and why we in the acquisition community are pushing so heavy for AI is our current acquisition system is painfully slow. I know everyone's sitting down, so I didn't want to shock anybody, so I waited for that. But definitely from a Department of Defense standpoint, this has now become a real problem. And the way we looked at it is we looked at what's happening in Ukraine. This is it is an absolute laboratory for 21st century conflict. And what we're finding is new capabilities are entering the battlefield very, very rapidly. But so for us in the acquisition community, it'd be like, no problem. I have the DoD 5,000, so I'm going to palm for the money to do it. So give me about two plus years, right? And then I'll get the money. And then at that point, I could put together all my contracting actions. So I follow all these steps, which is very, very manual. Take another 6 to 9 months to do that. Okay, and then I'll initiate the program. So no problem. 4, 5 years, I'll have the answer for your thing today, right? That is just not going to work. Cold War era, maybe today that doesn't work. So there is this has now become a combat capability.
Can I jump in here on this?
Sure.
Because the duration of the time it takes to buy or acquire something is very relevant, especially when you think about the leadership in each of our agencies. So, and this is not unique to DoD, this is true of the civilian agencies as well, where the average tenure of your C-suite is somewhere around 2 years. It takes longer to get your budget submission done. And so by the time you have somebody new in the C-suite coming in, they're working on 2 years ago, the budget numbers that were submitted then and the initiatives that were important then. So yeah, this is not just DoD, but great point.
Can I jump in? Sorry. I always think it's valuable to share real world perspectives of what people are doing, and just to note that there are a number of really practical use cases that are taking place in the DoD around AI that I've been involved in. There's one agency that's using their ServiceNow customer. They're piloting, I should say, ServiceNow AI agents, autonomous agents, to run contract reviews. And as part of their core vendor management. So it's not just getting the contract awarded. It's what do you do with these contracts that you have over time, and contract closeouts, and these things that nobody ever really focuses on. These are great tasks for agents and automation in general. So to your point, DoD is leading, I think, in a lot of ways. And again, there's an agency piloting these agents today to make up for staffing shortages that they have now and will likely grow over time.
Yeah, and in terms of the staffing shortages, that's something that's a little bit near and dear to me, why I'm so passionate about deploying, I'll call it enterprise AI, because I like to separate combat AI to enterprise AI. So for those outside the DoD, I've been utilizing AI since 2015, 2016, using submarine acoustic data to find bad guy submarines, right? That is, so when I got brought into this, I'm like, oh, I know AI. I've done this. I did this for 10 years. Enterprise AI is a whole different bag of worms. But in terms of the EOs, the workforce reduction, so I grew up in the submarine community. In the mid-90s, we had a very large RIFs in the Department of Defense, things like that. And back then, we were able to make, depending on the year, between 4 and 6 688 class fast attack submarines a year. This was no AI, no CAD, very, compared technologically, Stone Age compared to today. Today, we can barely make 2 Virginia-class submarines a year. Now, think about that brain drain. Think about everything that we lost during that period in the 90s after the wall fell. Well, I look at what's happening now, and having grown up in the wreckage of that when I entered the Navy, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, we have institutional knowledge and expertise that have taken decades and decades for us to just even be able to do 2 Virginia-class submarines and maybe half a Columbia-class in a year. So if we're having a workforce reduction, we need to circle our wagons around those technical people, that institutional knowledge. That is a national defense imperative. What are we going to do? We can 2 submarines a year, try going down to 1. See what that does. That's devastating for our industrial base, devastating for our Navy, devastating for our national security. So when I look at, oh, well, we need to build system engineering plans or program protection plans or acquisition strategies, and that's very, very unique and bespoke type of work. So we need to keep those individuals doing that. So we're going to let go of all these technical people who really know how to build nuclear submarines so we can make sure we can get these regulatory and statutory documents completed. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, AI can do a significant amount of work in these areas. And let's focus on maintaining that core knowledge, that core base that we really, really need moving forward.
Right, and at the beginning of your response, you mentioned how you obviously handle different classifications, levels of data. So we've talked about some of the challenges with data itself, and then the acquisition. I want to get into security a little bit. So as we talk about those different levels of sensitivity, how are you overcoming barriers with that, knowing what you can use for AI, what you can't use, and the different places you're implementing that?
Yeah. Strangely enough, the security is not as hard as the intellectual property problem. And I can touch on that, but I'll answer your question on security. So the good news is our current Navy CIO office is absolutely fantastic. I've been in the Navy for 20 years. This is by far the most forward-leaning group that you're going to see. So we have very good infrastructure to be able to host this. For example, right now I'm running in partnership with them, Department of the Navy GPT, Don GPT. Okay, well, what's so unique about that? Well, it is hosted in our flank speed enterprise environment, which means aisle 5, and it's capable of moving up to aisle 6. So we have these digital environments that we've been able to get our authorities to operate on. So that's been actually pretty good from a security standpoint, because handling security data is something we've been doing for a very, very long time. The IP problem is almost a bigger problem, shockingly, because again, we already have these networks. People are working those classification levels, have those terminals. We can handle that. But how do I deal with mixed intellectual property? If I train a model, for example, and there's limited purpose rights on the data that is in our databases, is that model now limited purpose rights? Do I obfuscate it? Okay, if I do, what does that do to my model? That is actually strangely, the biggest problem, not as much the classification, but the intellectual property and data rights issue.
Well, and compounding that with, you can use certain types of attacks to extract the original training data from some of these models. So, if you have unique enough training data, it's possible to extract that. All these models are doing is looking at the entirety of our published works. And if I say, to build on what Zach was saying earlier, Old MacDonald had a farm, 99% of the time, it's going to know what comes next. And so if you're plugging in some sensitive pieces of information, you might get that sense of next word out.
And maybe if I can add on that, we recently came out with a policy that said researchers cannot use genomic data in a public like ChatGPT for training, just exactly for that reason, because you will be able to, if you're sophisticated enough, extract out that data through the training parameters. So in that sense, the policy does not allow researchers to do generative AI on genomic data, but we are moving and looking into secure enclaves where we can control the data and the training and therefore hopefully reduce that risk. We aren't there yet, but we are really thinking about that. And you bring up a good point about the complexity of data governance and AI, because some patients who are part of clinical trials may say, yes, you can use my data for any type of research, whereas others will say, no, you can only use my data to understand glioblastoma. And tracking the governance of that and how that will feed into models is something that's doable technologically, but it is still a challenge, especially when you have millions and millions of record data.
So it's to tweak the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, which is still entirely true for AI models. If you also have some diamonds mixed into those training models, you can get those diamonds out as well. So garbage and diamonds in, diamonds out, I guess.
So what are some of the different use cases or programs? Susan, I'd like to start with you. When we talk about AI, where do we see this in action?
Yeah, in the research field, it's super broad. Everything from things that NLM are doing, the National Library of Medicine, to allow you to do facile search for publications. We have a really inventive PI at the NLM who's developed sophisticated large language models in a work called PubTators, which will allow you to do really a facile search for publications, to work that my office with the Office of the Director sponsors in a program called Aim Ahead, which is essentially a co-designed program with communities that are underserved in our health sector to help them develop AI, work with software engineers, and really get those applications into rural community settings. So a lot of the hospitals that we work with, they have absolutely no ability or time to really work with tech. So we, as a research organization, work with the university sectors and these rural hospitals. We have over 1,400 institutions working with us and over 4,000 trainees. It's also a very large capacity building program, making sure that students who are interested in AI across the United States have that opportunity to learn and to develop their skills in this space. And of course, there's ongoing sophisticated research, for example, in the opioid use disorder, looking at AI for risk stratification, for treatment, and for therapies in drug addiction. So it spans the gamut of all of our work. I will mention one use case because it just came out on May 9th. We partner with the Department of Energy, not sure if we have a Department of Energy colleague here, in the supercomputing centers at Oak Ridge National Lab, and they've recently published work on artificial intelligence extraction of ePath reports. So if you're doing a diagnosis of cancer, it's the ePath reports that are the key finding that give you that early diagnosis. Well, your ePath reports are not connected to your EHR system. So being able to pull those out and link those to your EHR system and send them off to the cancer surveillance programs is really key for that very early diagnosis of cancer. And I'm really pleased and proud that we're able to partner with the Department of Energy on this and also on the National AI Research Resource.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Jake, I know earlier in the conversation you mentioned Don GPT. Could you tell us a bit more about what went into that and the next steps for that or other use cases, implementations?
Yeah, absolutely. DoD, we have a very unique ability to be extremely ahead on a lot of capability and at the same time incredibly behind on a lot of things. What I'm about to describe, some of you are going to be like, "Wow, how is that impressive?" But for DoD, it kind of is. What we decided, large-scale enterprise adoption of capability, especially something as culturally shaping as AI, can be very, very challenging, especially with a very legacy organization like DoD. So what we decided to do is instead of taking all this time and having all these studies and building this huge thing and then deploying it out to the world, what we decided to do is we're going to start small and we're going to scale rapidly. So I know these are a lot of buzzwords, but essentially what we did is we said, okay, what is the infrastructure we need to demonstrate what AI can do from an enterprise solution? So again, working with the CIO office, this was aisle 5, so that was very, very unique amongst a lot of AI capabilities that were deployed out. And aisle 6, as I said before, said, okay, it's now in our enterprise system, so we can scale to every single person in the Navy and Marine Corps if we needed to. Like it's no longer, hey, look at this great capability, it worked great, no problem, give me 2 or 3 years and it'll get there. No, we wanted the ability to rapidly transition. So then what we did is we had our alpha trials. So the thing is, okay, back to the use cases, where is AI beneficial? And instead of just me coming up with them in the Pentagon with all my great ideas, we said, no, we're gonna have a very unbounded trial period. It's gonna be 45 days, and I picked multiple different functional areas: acquisition, engineering, legal, congressional affairs, et cetera, logistics. And here's your login, you're an alpha, just use it. And if it's useful, or whatever you use it for, the only thing I'm asking is in 45 days, you fill out this one line on the spreadsheet, and if you take more than 5 minutes to doing it, you're doing it too much. Now, that's done 2 things. One, it has uncovered a bunch of use cases that we didn't really think about, because these are the actual people doing the work, right? These are the people actually doing the job, and they're using this tool to make their job better in a certain area. This wasn't just a think tank or consultants that came in with nice PowerPoints. These were the actual end users. But the other really impressive part of it to me was the journey can be more enlightening than the destination. So culturally changing a place like the Department of Defense to start utilizing AI tools when we have all these rigid processes and things we've been doing it for years and years and years and years. Now all of a sudden, instead of just throwing it at them, you now have champions. You now have advocates, right? Because they actually gave the feedback and they tell us, hey, we tried in this use case, and I said, negative feedback is good too. Say, hey, you thought it was great here, turns out it took me twice as long and it was a total mess, but you had no idea, I had no idea that it would be so valuable here. So it did cultural and also gave us that feedback. It was really incredible.
I think there's a couple of kinds of flavors of these interactions. One, someone is using a chatbot powered by AI to get information or ideas to do their work and to make their day-to-day easier. There's another flavor where they're asking a question or they're making a request, and that request, may have been something that previously was fulfilled by people. And I'm seeing more and more instances where people want to automate those requests using AI agents. And sometimes there's simple things that can add a lot of value. For example, one of the things that we do internally at ServiceNow, and we're very proud that we use ServiceNow to run the company and implement these kinds of agents to make our lives as employees easier, is something as simple as requesting a new piece of software, right? So I want something deployed on my laptop, and okay, it could previously go through IT to support that. I can do that through an agent. But even more importantly, that because I've looked into this one and how it worked. The agent, if there's not a license available, it's able to go out and look at who has licenses and who's not using them. So as opposed to going out and buying more licenses, right, or getting in a situation where we're out of compliance, I can reclaim, or the agent can reclaim a license, can go in Active Directory, take that user out of the unit and add me instead. Now I can go ahead and use that software, and we're able to manage the cost of those licenses much more effectively. I think that has broad applicability in federal government. We've talked a lot about licensing in the first few months of this administration. We always have, right? There's been lots of requirements around software licensing on the FITARA scorecard and things like that. But we never really fully automated these things, and that's one of the reasons why I think as people go into agencies, they find some situations where there are either lots of licenses not being used or too many licenses because nobody's managing these things. We've been much more effective at trying to manage licensing requirements and the cost associated with licensing by using agents to do the work that people may not have had time to do before or didn't want to do or didn't consider high priority. And even if it's not thought to be high priority, you could save a lot of money. And those cost savings are so clearly critical in this administration. They should always have been, but there really is a focus there. This is a great way to meet some of those needs.
Right, and Kevin, I'd like to dive into one of the recent reports GAO released. I'm not a numbers person, but I have the title written out. So generative AI's environmental and human effects. What were some of the takeaways from that report, and how can agencies use the information to improve their own AI?
So this was a relatively short report, thankfully. Yeah, apologies for those who need more reading material to go to bed at night. So that report focused, as the title implies, on the environmental and human effects. So environmental, it's not just the cost of running the data center. It's not just the energy required to power it or the water required to cool it, but it's also further upstream, the energy and water that it requires to train the model, but even further upstream, the minerals and the processes and the fuel that it takes to build the hardware. And these large language models and generative AI chew through data and the hardware faster than I think people are realizing. And so we came out with some findings in terms of how much it actually costs when you do those queries to ChatGPT, or when you ask it to generate an image of a frog riding a unicorn for your kids or something like that, so that you could actually quantitatively put, into your mental model. Like I think it's something like a bottle of water per image generated, or maybe a fraction of a bottle of water, but it's still, wow, is that picture of Kermit the Frog on the unicorn really worth that or not? And then in the human aspects, we've been talking a lot how and it's still unclear whether this is going to be the big enabler and empowerer, or if it's going to, suddenly it cut off there. Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger in T-1000 didn't like that. If you are a transcriptionist, courtroom reporter, your job is in trouble right now. But if you are using AI to empower your employees, if you're doing cybersecurity and you're using AI to dig through the logs that no normal person would ever want to touch, it's way too granular, then that can be good. Or if you're doing what HHS does and look across the entire United States and look at every single prescription and look for patterns and trends, and oh wow, we may have a burgeoning opioid crisis in this small town. That's cool, and that's enabling, not replacing.
Right. Just want to thank you for that report. It certainly made an impact here at NIH and HHS, and we were just talking about the environmental impact of the work that we're doing in AI. So it certainly is a really important report, and thank you again.
Glad people are reading it.
And Susan, I'd like to end with you. So as you mentioned some of the really cool use cases you're using at NIH, as your agency is building out those solutions, how are you scaling it?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think that we're looking at this in multiple ways. There certainly is the scaling of increasing the number of researchers who have the the funding and the ability to develop and use AI. That's part of our program with Aim Ahead. We're looking at the way to scale data. Part of that is through the program called Bridge to AI, which has been generating large-scale, we call them gold standard data sets in very critical disease-focused areas. And part of it is working across our agencies and the NARE, the National AI Research Resource, we don't provide compute, but we do partner with Google, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Carahsoft, actually, to provide researchers those cloud computing capabilities in AI. So for us, it's scaling out our partnership with DOE, with NSF, and with our cloud providers to really think about how we can enable the next generation of compute for AI and how we can fund researchers or incentivize in other ways for them to adopt AI and to now think about it in ways that are compatible with our goals in environment and energy. So scaling for us is a big issue, and taking a very multi-pronged approach to this.
I want to conclude with one final thought, because I'm having a vision of a future GAO report that says agencies are not managing the swath of AI resources that they've invested in, right? Much like data centers, we'll end up with a lot of data centers and computer rooms, and there's going to be this boom where people are buying models and they're using AI, but there's not an overarching AI governance capability inside agencies. So 1,000, 1,000,000 flowers bloom, and nobody knows if they're getting value from these things, and nobody knows that they're providing good results and how they're being used. And agencies need to be thinking, organizations, not just government agencies, organizations need to be thinking about all of these things that we're building and creating and buying today, and how do we manage our expectations around them? Are they creating value? Are they meeting the results? Is the data staying in sync? Is it still providing good results over time as it's trained? If we're not taking these steps now, it's going to be too late down the line in order to establish some AI governance around it. And there will, guarantee you, be a GAO report about the thousands of models agencies have and how they don't know what they're doing, and they're not maintained over time. It would be number 4697321.
Well said.
Yeah, those are some great thought-provoking questions. Cues us up nicely for the interactive roundtables that are to come. So thank you all so much for joining today. This was a really great conversation. I appreciate your perspectives.